Peter Zeihan grew up the son of two teachers in Marshalltown, Iowa. That curiosity into the world around him, instilled by his parents, has driven him professionally. And he is concerned that not enough people are taking the time to truly think about how the world impacts what is happening in their towns. Hi, I'm Dave Price. Now, Marshalltown, Iowa is a community surrounded by agriculture, but also a community that has found growth through immigrants. Peter has taken his experience from growing up there as he has traveled the world for a variety of jobs. Jobs like at the American Embassy in Australia, at the Center for Political and Strategic Studies, which is a think tank founded by Susan Eisenhower. He is now a traveling keynote speaker, a content creator, and a geopolitical expert with the firm he founded, Zeihan on Geopolitics. We're going to cover a lot of deep issues this week in our conversation with him, but specifically what he says about immigration, whether you agree or you disagree, it seems like a conversation that we need to have right now in the United States. Let us begin with how his views of the world formed as he grew up. All right, so you grew up in Marshalltown, Iowa. Population 27, 28K or so, maybe a little smaller when you were there.
It's boomed. It used to be 22.
How much?
It used to be 22.
See, it's exploded since you've left. But how and why growing up there did you decide, I want to be a geopolitical guru? How did that happen?
I would love to say there was a straight line.
There never is a straight line in life.
Short version is that both my parents were teachers. My mom taught English as a second language, so I was always being exposed to people from other places. And my father taught social studies at the middle school level, and I actually helped him correct some of his students' work when I was in grade school. So I'd always been fascinated by maps and every place that could take me. And when I went to university, I was originally aiming for a dual political science chemistry degree, and the Cold War was ending. I was thinking of maybe going into weapons disarmament, and then the Cold War ended on me, and all of a sudden it was a brave new world, and I just wanted to explore it. So I went to New Zealand on a Rotary Scholarship, came back to the States, and got some diplomatic and economic training, and eventually turned into this.
And so for our friends who are particularly those outside of Iowa, the Marshalltown community, one of the fascinating parts about that, and you mentioned what your folks did for a living, is that because of the immigrants who move into that area, right, because of the various industries around there, you probably do get to meet folks from all over the world, right?
It evolved quite a bit as I was growing up. It's where Fisher Controls did their design headquarters for a while. And so that always brought in some Japanese, some Koreans, and especially Europeans. And then when I was in college, it changed considerably because that's when the information revolution was starting to take off. And so we saw this really big change in the American workforce, where we started going into high-end manufacturing and design and computers, but we still needed all the nuts and bolts that made everything else work. So what we discovered in Marshalltown, where we had a meatpacking plant, is that the workforce was going up, but all of the needs remained. And the only way to square that circle was to import labor. And so if you look at an ethno-linguistic map of Iowa by county, you'll notice that Marshalltown, Iowa is the darkest one because it has the highest percentage of Hispanics living in the county. And Marshalltown specifically today is about 1/3 Hispanic birth, mostly Mexican.
Okay, so fast forward, we'll just say a couple years, and here you are now.
That's very kind of you.
I was born in your decade, so I'm going to be kind to both of us.
Okay.
All right, so this world is interconnected in ways that I think we are all slowly better understanding, and I feel like we can go at this from a million different ways, but what's fascinating, I feel like talking to those in the ag community, especially as you talk to older folks who maybe started out or their folks started out and you were as good as you could do, weather permitting. But now you have access to information all over the world, which can impact so many different markets. And where I really wanted to start, I mean, we got to talk about tariffs, of course, but I wanted to talk about Russia
Sure.
because I naively thought when Russia invaded, this was going to be a butt kicking and
You're not the only one.
it was going to be over fast, right? So why did that not happen?
Well, let's start with where I was. I broadly agreed with you, but when I saw the changes that the Ukrainians had made to their military structure since 2014, when the first invasion happened,
Hmm.
they moved away from the Soviet draft and just throw mass people at the problem and started doing small unit logistics, groups training as small as 4 to operate autonomously with new weapons. And you really had a sense of camaraderie among the population that didn't exist before. I mean, you could make the argument before 2014 that Ukraine really wasn't a real country. It's just a post-Soviet blah. But after 2014, the threat of the Russians, that really changed. They really pulled together. So I was probably, in my world, the most optimistic for Ukrainian success. And even I thought it was all going to be over in under a year. Uh, but the Ukrainians really stood up in a way that I didn't think was possible. The Americans got involved in a way that I didn't think was possible. And the Europeans pulled together in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Give you an idea on the Europeans. You got 20 odd countries in the European Union that can agree on very little, including things like cheese policy. The core division is between the countries that are rich and the countries that would like to be rich, and the countries that would like to be rich would like the countries that are rich to give them money. That's really the bottom line here. So there's something that's called a lending facility that they have that they established during the financial crisis back in like 2007 to 2012. And we get to 2022, they still haven't used it. The idea is that you jointly raise money and then apply it to the countries that need it, but they could never agree on repayment. They use it for Ukraine to buy ammo in like a week. And it was that kind of scale of shift in mindset in Washington and Brussels and Berlin and Paris and Rome and all the rest that decided that, if we look at our history, if we're honest with ourselves on our history and the geography of this region, the Russians will never stop at Ukraine, and they will come for Warsaw, and they will come for the Danube Basin, and we will be right back to where we were in 1946, and we will have to do this all over again, complete with the threat of nuclear war hanging over our heads for the next several decades. And so the conclusion, which I heartily supported, was that we need to do something. And I didn't think the West had it in them. But here we are.
Does the West still have it in them?
There is certainly a strain of thought in some politics in some places that want to give in to the Russians for various reasons. So, for example, if you're in Hungary or Slovakia, maybe even in Austria, that used to be an independent empire. Remember Austro-Hungarian Empire? It
Hmm.
used to be that. And after World War I, it got broke up. But a lot of the people would really like to be a power player again. And the only way they can be a power player again is if they have some collaboration with the Russians. So basically, you see people trying to return to a power structure that's 130 years out of date. It'll never happen, but nostalgia is powerful. In the United States, to be perfectly blunt, there's many levels to this, but Russian propaganda really did penetrate into MAGA very, very, very deeply and shaped American policymaking under the Trump administration until recently. And details are still fuzzy, but basically we had a series of 5 meetings between Trump and senior Russian officials in a row, where after the meeting, Trump came home and chatted with Melania about it, and she told her how things actually were. Uh, and he realized that the Russians have just been playing him. And so now we've had this evolution, and the Russians are now spinning up their MAGA propaganda again to try to split the MAGA movement. And that's why Marjorie Taylor Greene suddenly is a Trump opponent, because she's been working for Moscow the whole time. So I don't want to call a forecast here. There are too many pieces in motion that are based on too much misinformation and too many factions that are making domestic decisions that have global consequences. We are in the churn full time now.
Why was the Russian propagandizing, if that's a word, why was that successful, at least in some of these limited corners?
Well,
How did that work?
The Russians going back to the 1930s have been using propaganda to try to shape the American political space. The general feel is if the United States is divided against itself at home, then it can't have a strong foreign policy abroad. And it's a fairly low cost operation for a country that's always going to be diametrically opposed to American interests because they're a major land power that can only get security by absorbing all the other land powers around them, several of which are trading partners and allies and cultural origin points. Whereas the United States basically has a continent to itself, and so is always a naval power, and we're never really going to get along. And so if they can just poke at us every once in a while, and they've been poking for a long time, anything that starts up some ridiculous political movement is something they see as a plus. So, for example, Greenpeace, if you want to go back to the origins, that started as as a KGB operation. Um, Today, it remains somewhat because the Russians keep poking at it as well. It's only in the last 10 years that we had the splitting of the conservative movement in the United States, what we used to think of as Republicans,
Hmm.
that's provided an opportunity for them to get on the right side of the American political spectrum. And so if you think about what the Republicans were 10, 15 years ago, national security, business, fiscal conservatism, national defense, those were the core defining issues.
Hmm.
Those people don't run the Republican Party anymore. Trump does. And so it's been a lot easier for the Russians to drive in wedges until they pissed Trump off personally. And now it's a new game.
Were there outside influences, do you think, that affected this movement now about immigration?
You mean MAGA?
Hmm.
Um, I don't mean to suggest that MAGA wouldn't have happened without the Russians. That's not the case. The Russians exacerbate shards and breaks that are there. They very rarely create new ones. And MAGA has always been obsessed about the immigration question. But the Russians will absolutely do whatever they can to make it more intense.
Okay, so looking at what we are going through right now, and we've seen it in a couple other countries in different forms, but this anti-immigrant is maybe appropriate in some sectors, but primarily this push that the Trump administration has really aggressively pursued to expel those who are not living here legally or who had some kind of temporary legal status, maybe under Biden. What is driving that?
I mean, you can always play the R word racism, that's real, but to be perfectly blunt, anti-immigrant sentiment is not unique to the United States. It's not unique to this
Yeah.
time frame. It exists all over. Everyone loves who they are. Everyone loves people who are like them. And the more diverse your community, unless you really redefine your sense of self, it generates frictions. Um, Historically speaking, the United States has done much better at most countries at managing that sort of diversity. It's one of 5 countries that are called settler states, where most of the people who are living in there and who are citizens do not trace their ancestry to these countries. And is not a monochromatic face. So, white Americans are only about half of the total, for example. Whereas if you're down in Mexico, yes, the Hispanics are not from there, but they're over 90% of the population. So they don't have this kind of tension built into their society. There's pros and cons. The pro is, wow, if you can absorb people from anywhere, you rarely face a demographic crunch. And so one of the things we're seeing in the traditional nation states, whether it's Japan or China or Korea or Italy or Germany or the rest, is that as they industrialized, they had fewer kids. And you play that forward for 90 years, it's been that long since industrialization started,
Hmm.
and you're now running out of people who are under age 60. So the average age in places like Germany and China is already over 50. And we're looking at ethnicities that will vanish from the earth this century. And there is quite a different economic process for when you are tilted that high in your age bracket and what is possible and what is not. The United States has never had to deal with that. We're the youngest of the first world countries, with the exception of New Zealand, who's right behind us. And at the current rate of aging, we're going to be younger than the Mexicans and the Brazilians and the Indians by mid-century. So the United States really does have legs because of the openness of its society until this year. This is the first year in American history, with the exception of the Spanish flu back in the 1919, I think.
Hmm.
First year ever that our population has dropped, largely because of the immigration question. So we, if we stick with these policies, are now starting down the path to national oblivion that so many other countries started so many years ago. We'll still get there last, but it is a concern from a cultural point of view for me. Shorter term, in my lifetime, it's an economic issue. I mean, how do you maintain an industrial base? How do you double the size of it? Because that's what we say we want to do if we want to break from China. You double the size of your industrial plant without a growing workforce. You would have to take everyone who has moved into those high-end white-collar design and manufacturing jobs and move them into construction. And
Hmm.
you'd be looking at a quantum decline in American standard of living from where we are now at like 60 grand per person to something closer to 20. Um, Part of the tension of a multicultural society is not just that we look different, it's that we do different jobs. And if you don't have people who are doing some of those lower end jobs, you either need to redefine the job or get other people. Historically, we've done that by getting other people. Not
That's
this
what's
year.
that's what's fascinated me with this whole thing, that the way Trump campaigned, and I have wondered, you start looking at polls with people's perception of crime, for example.
Sure.
I I am wondering, and as a guy who has worked in TV for a long time in my other life, I do think video, because you can see stuff, can maybe exaggerate thoughts that we have. So if you see a bad guy mugging a little old lady crossing the street, you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is happening everywhere," right? And we can see data that will show that that's not been the case with crime. So I'm wondering, I have been fascinated by what the overall American populace will think about Trump's immigration efforts here in light of what you're talking about. We've had a workforce problem, and this will exacerbate that. I'm in the state of Iowa. You lived in the state of Iowa when you were young. You know that we have a lot of communities in this state that are only growing because of immigrants.
Mhm.
And in fact, most of this state, the overwhelming percentage of the counties are shrinking in the state of Iowa population wise, and have been for
It's pretty
decades.
typical nationwide at this point.
For sure. So as we move forward, unless AI and robots are going to replace everything, it would seem that this worker shortage that we have, if we're going to expel all immigrants who don't have legal status or had temporary or whatever and don't restart it, I don't understand where that's going to leave us, and if that's really what the overall population wants. That was a
Well,
long wind up, sorry.
no, I hear you, but I mean, to be very clear, there's very little economic case for the anti-migrant push. It's personal, it's political, it's cultural, and if you look at the way our media is degraded over the last 40 years, it's pretty easy to explain. It used to be like, take the Des Moines Register, state paper, generally considered to be one of the best in the country. They used to have a couple dozen foreign bureaus, complete with local copy editors and researchers and stringers and local editors there who would go out, get the information, build the stories locally, process them locally, and then send them back to Des Moines for print. Well, when the facts came along, we discovered that maybe we didn't need the big decision maker in the center. They'd make the articles and then they'd send them in for approval in Des Moines. Well, then we got email, and so then we got rid of the copy editors. Well, then we got cellular communications, and we got rid of everything except for the stringers. We didn't write anything over there. Now, in the digital age, we just send roving reporters from time to time, or maybe just use algorithms to write the stories. So at every place where the technology advanced, fewer eyes were on every piece. And so we lost the ability to communicate context. You play that across the entire media space, and we're left with pretty much every American media function. Well, I shouldn't just say American, global, has basically forgotten how to take the information they're having and make it mean something to someone. Whereas you can put a talking head up there and talk opinion all day and throw a couple of video clips,
Hmm.
and you just take one tiny little piece out of context, and all of a sudden that's the news. And so we've lost the ability to parse. And for the younger generation, if you're under 25, you have never been exposed to what media is supposed to be. All you know is TikTok. And so, of course, the younger generation is completely fritzed when it comes to the ability to interpret the world around them. So this is only going to get worse because people like me who lived through the transition have some concept when something's put in front of me of whether it's a lie or not, or whether it's
Hmm.
incomplete or not. The younger you get, the more that goes away.
Okay, so you're an independent content creator. You talk to who knows how many people over the course of a year,
So many
both
people.
both through this, through your newsletter, in person at groups, virtually, all this kind of stuff. How do you see your role? Because you're looking at, by the very nature of the geopolitical guru, as I nicknamed you early on, you're looking at all of this stuff in all of these countries like this, using the perspective about what you've seen and experienced over your life. You've got to you've got to be our AI, but real person AI summary of what this all means, and we put it, then process it through our local lens. So how do you see your purpose to help us in light of the media changes? How do you see your purpose to help us understand what is going on globally and how it impacts me here?
Well, I am evolving in what I am doing right now. Until a few months ago, I saw my job as basically to peel out the parts of my larger forecast and apply them to what it means to the people in front of me. So most of my work is looking at demographic trends about how the world is aging, what that means for finance and manufacturing and workforces and military strategy and technology and blah, 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 blah. And then number two, how deglobalization is going from a theoretical issue to very, very real, and what that means for supply chains and flows of food and energy and all the rest. I take those two things, I make my forecast, and then I look at the group in front of me and I tell my story through their eyes. That's always been what I've been after. In the last year, that has changed quite a bit. I am not a fan of the presidents that we have elected since 1992. And I'm in particular, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump or Barack Obama. Uh, but under Trump too, we're now in a fundamentally new place because the pace at which the United States was backing away from the globalized structure has accelerated incredibly, but very few of the replacement structures that we would need to survive in a post-globalized world have been created. In fact, some of them that we desperately need, things like rule of law, are being actively broken down for political reasons. So I've always viewed the period from 2025 to 2035 as when everything was going to break, because so many countries now have aged not just to the point that they're running out of children, they're running out of working aged adults. And we don't have an economic theory that will work with where global demography is going to be over this decade. The question was, what does it happen towards the front end or the back end? And I had always planned to be kind of done by the time we hit that break point, because I can tell you how it's going to reform on the other side of a 10 to 15-year transition period, but I can't tell you about the day-to-day churn where everything is breaking and moving different directions for political reasons. And that's where we are now. Trump's policies have had any number of impacts, but for my life, it's that it's taken this 10-year transition period and just compressed it into a much shorter amount of time. And so I still have confidence of where this is going to end 15 years from now, but I have very low confidence in where things are going to evolve based on a political strategy that evolves by the second. We've now had 680 different tariff policies since January 20th. The ambient chaos makes it impossible for American businesses to decide anything about what they need to do. And so for the first time since the 70s, we're seeing industrial construction spending drop. And this is at a time where we really need to, if anything, double the size of the industrial plant. So the Trump administration's policies are making it much more difficult, if not impossible, for us to transition to where we need to be industrially. And the impact of that on every other economic sector is rapidly going from bad to catastrophic, and agriculture is absolutely at the top of that list.
And as we talk, the U.S. Supreme Court is yet to weigh in on Trump's kind of unilateral authority on levying these
Now,
tariffs.
we probably won't get that ruling until January, February. And even when we do, Trump has shown that he has no problem ignoring the law and making up new
Hmm.
reasons, which will then start the legal process again. So even if the Supreme Court rules 9-0 against the Trump administration, I don't think it's going to make a big difference. The only thing that would is if Congress starts repeatedly passing veto-proof laws to reclaim control over tariffs. Keep in mind that tariffs are the sole purview of Congress, not
Congress.
the executive. And so Trump has been using executive authority to reinterpret some old laws. And unless and until Congress steps up and starts doing your job, this is where we are.
But what is the tipping point to make that happen? As we are talking, we have the Epstein files, that's kind of the fodder on all of this stuff. And so maybe there's a little bit of the Republican wing that has pushed back a little bit about that, saying the public deserves to have this kind of information. But by and large, we have not seen a sizable chunk of the Republicans in Congress really showing any kind of opposition to tariffs. There were here and there maybe interviews and comments and stuff early on, and then maybe here and there since it's happened. But there's not really been that strong push. We're going to stop this. Is there something that is the tipping point to that? Is it inflation? Is it the difference of what's really happening with cost of living versus what the president is claiming? I mean, what changes this?
I mean, say what you will about Donald Trump, his charisma and his ability to rewrite the narrative on a whim is powerful stuff. And so we do have at the moment about a half a dozen senators. Let's see, Murkowski of Alaska, can't remember her name, but up in Maine,
Collins.
Collins, thank you, Grassley, Massey. These are old school Republicans who Trump has not managed to kick out of Congress yet. He's managed to get rid of most of the national security and
Hmm.
business Republicans and replace them with his own people. And he's achieved an almost complete sweep in the House of Representatives
Which
because,
is truly remarkable.
well, the House of Representatives cycles every 2 years. It takes
Sure.
6 years for the Senate, but
Yeah.
agreed, remarkable political feat. We now have those 6 senators who are even refusing to meet with potential Trump appointees that are unqualified, which is a significant step forward. But 6 senators out of 54 is not enough to move us into veto-proof territory, because not only would those 6 have to basically declare themselves to be a third party, because that's what the old school Republicans would be now. You have to get enough people who Trump put into place to defect to hit
Hmm.
that reliable 67 number. That's never happened in American history. I really doubt it's going to happen now. Every once in a while, you'll get a massively disconnected situation where the president goes one way and becomes unpopular. Congress consolidates a new view, and you get repeated vetoes. But I mean, the last time that happened was right after or in the vicinity of Reconstruction. I mean, you really have to go back, which, and I would say Reconstruction is a very, very specific case.
Yeah.
We're not there. Inflation is something that would do it, but inflation, if it gets really bad, and if every single American citizen becomes furious with Trump, it still doesn't matter electoral until we have an election.
Right.
And let's assume, it's never happened, but let's assume that the House completely flips in the midterms. 2 problems. Number one, that doesn't change the Senate
Right.
because only a third of them are up. And number two, have you seen the Democrats recently? Oh my God, they are useless. Um, it's not like there's another party out there waiting to sweep into power with some competent leadership and some good ideas. We're going through a political transition right now. Both parties are broken. The Democrats are just a cat fest, and the Republicans are a cult of personality, and we're getting the government that we voted for over the last 20 years.
How much will agriculture expect to suffer? As I think I mentioned in the email beforehand, I come in here with kind of the outsider's curiosity. Didn't grow up on a farm, didn't grow up in ag at all. Grew up in the Illinois side of St. Louis, so farms near us, but had no relatives on it. Now I married
Sure.
into a family where my wife has a couple generations back where they farmed and they still have some relatives who do. So I kind of look at it, I'm sure, a lot differently, but I look at it like we have some, and of course I'm in the state of Iowa. We grow beans really well. We grow corn really well. Others do wheat really well. So we do so much of this stuff, but almost too well, right? We have too much of this stuff. So we are dependent on these foreign markets to buy this stuff. And this tariff global whatever we have situation going on right now, it it's uncertain,
Yeah.
right? And you've got people struggling all over the place and they say, well, we don't want a bailout, but they need a bailout or they're going under.
Yeah, well, there's not going to be a bailout. A bailout would require a functional Department of Agriculture, and it was completely gutted in the early weeks of the administration, like every other department. And even if, I mean, they can't manage the programs they have now, much less do a bailout. So you should just write that off. It's not going to happen. This is very best of times, worst of times. So let's start with the good news before I absolutely drive people to suicide. Uh, Good news. The United States is the best farmland in the world. We have the best climate for it. The greater Midwest is the largest chunk of contiguous agricultural land of high quality on the planet. There's nothing that's even close. Number two would be Argentina. They've got less than 1/4 of our acres and not nearly as good from a rainfall point of view. We produce almost all of our inputs within the continent. We get our potash from Canada. We produce most of our nitrogen ourselves. The phosphate, we produce 90% of it. And of the 10% that we don't get, a lot of it's from this hemisphere or from allies. We produce our own fuel. We produce our own herbicides and pesticides with the notable exception of a few components. We can go into that if you want
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm.
We produce most of our own equipment. We do most of our own processing. It's all here. And so whatever,
Continentally spaced.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so whatever happens to the world doesn't affect our production process. And there's no one else on the planet who can say that. Brazil imports more than 80% of their inputs. China imports all of their fuel, most of their base materials outside of phosphate. And in any world where trade breaks down or there's a deglobalization event, and we're definitely having that, 3/4 of the world's farmers are looking at catastrophic adjustments, assuming they can grow crop at all. And we will be entering a world where, in the best case scenario, 1 billion people starve to death. And in that environment, if you're an American agriculturalist and your supply chain has not been interrupted, if you can't make money in that environment, you are in the wrong sector. But we have to get there first. And that's the 10 to 15 years of churn. And countries won't die at the same pace. Supply chains won't fall apart in any sort of meaningful order. And there's a lot of nuance and a lot of if then statements that have to be run in order to figure out how you navigate this change. That's then. Let's talk now. The American population isn't increasing. About 1990 is when it started to plateau. So based on the sector, you're looking at somewhere between 60% and 90% of increases in farm income in the last 35 years have been from exports. And because agriculture is almost always a protected sector, it's
Mm-hmm.
always the last thing that gets folded into a free trade agreement. And it was only through the work of the Clinton and the W. Bush administrations that farmers finally got mostly full access to the world about 15 years ago. And that's when farms started doing, in my opinion, really well. You break down the trade relationship at any level, and the first thing that the countries on the other side do is cut out agriculture because it's politically popular at home. And the last thing that recovers and gets put into the new agreement is agriculture because it's politically problematic, which means farmers have already lost access to everything that they've gained in the last 35 years, and they will not get it back in at least the next 15, because the Trump administration has yet to begin negotiations on a single free trade deal. Everything that we've had since April 2 has been about throwing on a tariff number and then having some superficial talks about changing that tariff number. non-tariff barriers have not been addressed at all. Products haven't been addressed at all. And the thick trade documents that are the backbone of every trade deal require a staff. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. Trade Representative's office was gutted. Trump gutted it more, and it is completely incapable of even having those negotiations with one country, much less the 200 that Trump is trying to juggle at once. So no, this chapter is over, and we're looking at overproduction in American agriculture of somewhere between 15 and 35% based on the sector. And the only way you deal with overproduction is to reduce production. And that means fewer producers. So it's going to be different state by state, sector by sector, but we're looking at roughly American or 1/3 of producers going out of business in the next 3 years.
I know, I've asked this probably of a handful of people so far, and this will be my naive outsider's look at this. And I largely see, I'm biased by the state of Iowa where I've been the last 20 plus years, but to be less depressing about
Yeah.
your forecast there for a shorter term, and I appreciate all the complications that would be involved, but do some of our producers have to look at segueing out of these mass-produced commodities like corn and beans for a better path forward, or is our system not capable of turning that around to
I
say,
have no doubt that farmers can change given a bit of a runway. Farmers, if anything, are, let me back up and make sure I say this correctly. Farmers are the smartest audiences I'm in front of by far. They're the only ones who think long term, much more so than the New York financiers. For New York, if you think 8 months out, people are like, what? No one's going to be doing anything then. It's like 8 days, 8 days. Um, so once there's a realization of the situation, I have no doubt things will change. And on the back end of this, 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be soy, 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 soy. Um, about half of the corn that's grown is for ethanol.
yeah,
About half of what's left is exported for animal feed. And in a world where people are starving, we're not going to be producing much corn at all. If it wasn't for the fact that the United States has engineered corn into its economy in different ways, I would say corn production would probably drop by 90%. Let's call it 2/3 though. But any place that grows corn can grow soy, and soy is cheap plant-based protein, and that'll keep 1 billion people alive. And I have no doubt that if the numbers are the same and farmers are given the choice between feeding people or making ethanol, I mean, that's not a hard decision for most of them. Whether you go monoculture or something else, wow, that's pros and cons. The French do this. Every French farmer grows a dozen different things.
yeah,
They're not nearly as efficient as American producers because of it, but it also means that based on the ebb and flow of trade and climate, that they always have something that's producing.
protection.
I don't think that model is easily applicable to the American experience, especially in the Midwest, because we are fully industrialized agriculture with low labor inputs over a large chunk of land. And if you decide you want to grow lots of different things, you're talking different equipment, different storage, different processing, different logistics, and all that requires more people. And we are now in a chronic labor shortage. So I don't think that will work. Um, Most of the farmers that are going to go out of business on a global scale in the next 10 to 15 years produce wheat. So wheat is still the world's #1 source of calories. So all of a sudden, North Dakota looks pretty good over the long term. We have to get there first. Um, my concern, much as it is with industry and electricity and manufacturing, is that the Trump policies are making it very difficult for us to get there.
Okay, close us out with something since we're heading toward the end of 2025. What has piqued your curiosity as you look ahead to 2026?
Critical materials. Trump administration is right, is that's a very big idea or big deal, whether it's rare earths or things that are less rare.
Mhm.
Uh, because of the way globalization has been set up, because of the way that the Chinese over subsidize any industry that they think they might be able to corner, and the processing of these materials, the technologies involved are over a century old. It's not hard. The Chinese have dominated that space over the last 25 years, and now based on the materials, between 60 and 90% is produced there. And everyone is screaming at the Chinese, who are now using that control to shape other negotiations. They're using it as a trump card.
Nice.
Smart. And everyone wants the Chinese to reopen the exports. No problem with that. But it really misses the point. The Chinese are the fastest aging demography in human history. The Chinese economy in a deglobalized world ceases to exist, and we are likely to see the end of the Han ethnicity this century, if nothing changes in their favor. We don't need materials from China. We just need an alternative industrial plant to refine and process our own. And so everything that's come out of this administration has been about reopening the exports from China, but not a cent has gone into building out the industrial plant locally. And that has really gotten my attention, because we're now bringing forward this period where everything breaks. And a lot of the building blocks that they were starting to build up under Trump 1 or Biden, we've kind of abandoned in the last 6 months.
Fascinating conversation. I really look forward to hearing you when you come to town
It's
in
going to be lively.
January for the Land Expo. I would assume so. Thank you much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You can learn more about Peter's recent work, his books, and his upcoming book by checking out our profile piece about him. It's in the American Farmland Owner Weekly Newsletter. You can find interviews with thought leaders, trends, overcoming challenges, and new opportunities. It's the place where landowners get their news. You can also find out how you can hear Peter Zeihan in person. He will be one of the keynote speakers at the annual Land Investment Expo in Des Moines, Iowa, on January 13th, 2026. Find out how to see him, how to get your tickets, whether you want to watch in person or virtually. You can find all of that by going to our website, AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.